She walked out of the towering Pinnacle Corporation building, her heart sinking with every step. Rejected, overlooked, just another failed attempt in a city that never seemed to care. But little did she know, her life was about to collide with the most powerful man in New York in a way no one could have predicted. Want to know how it all unfolds? Hit subscribe and follow along for the journey. Helena's footsteps echoed in the cold, sterile lobby of Pinnacle Corporation's glass tower, the weight of rejection pressing down on her shoulders. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the building itself was swallowing her up. She clutched her worn canvas bag tighter, the fabric creasing in her grip, her fingers digging into it as though it could hold her together. She could already feel the sting of disappointment creeping into her chest. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, she thought bitterly, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss, sealing her inside the box of her own failure. I gave it everything I had, but it was never enough. The job interview had started off with promise. She had practiced her answers, rehearsed every word, tried to present the best version of herself. But in the end, her nerves got the best of her. Alexander Reed, CEO of Pinnacle, had barely glanced up from his desk when she entered, his disinterested gaze already evaluating her, picking her apart before she even spoke. Too inexperienced, he'd said coldly, dismissing her with a wave of his hand as if she were just another applicant to cross off the list. We need someone who can handle the pressure, someone who doesn't tremble under it. It felt like a slap in the face. She was used to rejection, but somehow this one felt different, more personal. As Helena exited the building, she tried to push the anger aside, her mind racing with thoughts of Lily, her 3-month-old daughter. I can't keep failing, she thought, guilt flooding her chest. I have to do better. For her. I have to keep going. Outside, the hustle of the city surrounded her. The noise of cars honking, people rushing to and fro, was all a blur as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. New York City had a way of swallowing up dreams, chewing them up and spitting them out without a second thought. But she couldn't afford to think like that. She couldn't afford to let herself fall apart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she sighed, pulling it out with a sense of dread. She had already received 3 calls from Lily's daycare that morning. Her stomach twisted as she looked at the screen, a number she didn't recognize flashing across it. She swiped the screen, her breath catching. Hello? The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, and utterly unrecognizable. Is this Helena Morgan? The voice asked, a slight edge of urgency to it. Yes, Helena replied, trying to steady her voice, though she could feel the panic rising in her chest. What is it? This is Manhattan General Hospital, the voice continued. We need to speak to you immediately. It's about your daughter, Lily. Helena's heart stopped. Lily? She repeated, her voice trembling. What's wrong with her? Is she okay? There was a pause on the other end, and the voice softened. She's been admitted. She has a high fever, and her condition is concerning. But we're doing everything we can. The problem is, you've listed someone named Alexander Reed as her emergency contact. We've been trying to reach you, but you're not answering. The words hit Helena like a slap. Why the hell did I list him? She thought in a flash of panic. She had barely even known him. Hadn't he rejected her just days ago? Why on earth would she have put him down as Lily's emergency contact? She was suddenly aware of how tightly she was holding the phone, her knuckles white. Her mind raced, in a whirlwind, trying to piece together what had just happened. But the only thing that mattered right now was Lily. Before she could say anything more, the voice on the other end urged her again. Ms. Morgan, please, if you can't be reached, we need to know what to do. Your daughter is here, and we need someone who can make decisions for her. Do you want us to try to reach Mr. Reed? The name hit her like a bolt of lightning. Alexander Reed, she thought, her stomach flipping. The CEO, why is he listed as an emergency contact for my daughter? I'll be there, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, fear creeping in. I'll come right now. As Helena hung up the phone, her heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a crisis. Without thinking, she started, running through the crowded streets of New York, the cold air rushing past her face as she pushed forward. She wasn't sure what she was going to do when she got there. What was Alexander going to say? Why had he been listed as Lily's emergency contact? Had he even known? But there was no time to waste on questions. She had to get to her daughter. Meanwhile, inside Pinnacle Corporation, Alexander Reed was reviewing reports in his office, unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. As he clicked through files, his mind remained focused on business, until his assistant, Diane, knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Reed," she said, stepping inside. "There's an urgent call from Manhattan General Hospital. They insist on speaking with you." Alexander frowned. Hospital, he thought. What could this be about? He gestured for her to put the call through, already irritated by the interruption. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Mr. Reed, we're calling about a patient named Lily Collins. She was admitted with a high fever, and you are listed as the secondary emergency contact." Alexander's brow furrowed. "I don't know anyone by that name," he said, shaking his head. "There must be some mistake," the voice continued. "Ms. Morgan, her mother, is not answering her phone. We need someone who can make decisions for the child." "Helena Morgan," Alexander repeated, the name vaguely familiar. The woman he had rejected just 2 weeks ago. He couldn't place the connection until the nurse described Helena's appearance. Petite, dark-haired, in her mid-20s. Then it clicked. This was the woman he had sent packing, the one who had nervously shaken his hand and left his office with her head down, defeated. Now somehow her baby was in the hospital, and he was listed as the emergency contact. The unease began to grow inside him. What on earth had she been thinking? He wondered. But something else gnawed at him, a strange feeling of responsibility, of duty, pulling him toward the hospital. Without another word, he stood up, walked to the door, and made arrangements to visit the hospital. He didn't know it yet, but this simple decision was the first step toward a chain of events that would change everything, for him, for Helena, and for little Lily. Helena's mind raced as she sprinted through the streets of Queens, the harsh December wind biting at her face. She could barely focus, the world around her blurring into a chaotic mess of neon signs, honking horns, and the endless sound of footsteps. Her heart thudded against her chest, each beat heavy with anxiety. "Lily, please be okay," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with fear. She had never intended for this, never wanted to drag Alexander Reed of all people into her already complicated life. But now he was listed as Lily's emergency contact, and she had no choice but to face the consequences of her own decision. Why did I do that? She wondered again, the guilt tightening in her chest. Helena reached her building in a near frenzy, her breath shallow as she hurried up the stairs to her apartment. She knocked once, twice before the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Perez, the elderly woman from the neighboring apartment. Her face was a mix of concern and suspicion, her thin eyebrows furrowed beneath her gray hair. "Looking for Helena?" Mrs. Perez asked, her voice thick with a New York accent. She stepped aside, letting Helena inside. "Yes," Helena replied breathlessly. "Where is she? Is she okay?" Her voice wavered as she glanced around, hoping for a sign that everything would be all right. Mrs. Perez looked at her for a long moment before answering, her eyes softening. "She collapsed at the diner last night. Poor thing. She was working herself to the bone. They took her to Queen's Memorial." Helena's heart sank as her knees nearly buckled beneath her. She collapsed? The words hit her like a freight train. Helena had known Helena was struggling, working 3 jobs, taking care of Lily, barely scraping by. But hearing it from Mrs. Perez made it real, too real. She turned to rush out, but the old woman's voice stopped her. "Hey, don't you want to know why she listed that man?" Mrs. Perez asked, her eyes narrowing. Helena froze, her breath caught in her throat. "What? Why'd she put him down?" Mrs. Perez repeated, nodding toward the open door. "That man? Reed, the big shot from Pinnacle. She hardly knows him, but she put him down, didn't she? Mrs. Perez paused for a beat, watching as Helena's face paled. I've seen her struggling, trying to make ends meet for that baby. Maybe she thought it was a safer choice. A man like him, powerful, important, he could help, you know. Helena swallowed hard. She hadn't known why she'd put Alexander on the form, only that something about him had given her a strange sense of security. A man like him, wealthy, influential, was someone who could help in a world that had been crushing her. But Mrs. Perez's words struck deeper than she could have anticipated. She needed someone to trust, someone who could give her child a fighting chance, Helena thought bitterly. Mrs. Perez, Helena said, her voice hoarse. I need to go to Queen's Memorial now. Can you watch Lily? Of course, Mrs. Perez answered, nodding quickly. Go on now. You've got a lot to sort out, it seems. As Helena hurried out, her thoughts were a whirlwind. Why had she trusted Alexander? Why had she written his name down of all people? They had only met once, and she had been rejected by him so quickly. But in the midst of desperation, she'd chosen him, someone she thought might be her only shot at hope. Meanwhile, at Queen's Memorial Hospital, the tension in the air was palpable. Officer Harris, a seasoned cop in his mid-40s, stood by the hospital's main entrance, his eyes scanning the busy scene. He had been called in to oversee the situation after Helena's unexpected emergency contact had caused a stir. Mr. Reed? Officer Harris muttered under his breath as he glanced at the man who had just walked through the front doors. Alexander Reed, the CEO of Pinnacle Corporation. What the hell is he doing here? Harris thought, his instincts kicking in. This wasn't a typical situation. Harris had worked in the city long enough to know when something didn't add up. A billionaire CEO, known for his ruthless business practices, standing in the pediatric ward of a hospital, waiting to hear about a sick child he barely knew, didn't make sense. I've seen my fair share of rich people who don't give a damn about the little guys, Harris thought, keeping his eye on Reed as he walked towards the nurse's station. He wasn't sure what to make of Reed. The man's cold exterior, his tailored suit, his sharp gaze, it all screamed power. But Harris couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than meets the eye. Why would a man like him care about a baby? And why would he come all the way down here to a place like this? Harris wondered, his mind racing. Reed's arrival didn't go unnoticed by the staff either. Nurse Santiago, who had been on shift all night, gave Harris a quick glance before walking over to Alexander. The tension in her movements was hard to ignore. She was trying to remain professional, but there was something about Reed's presence that felt off. Mr. Reed, I believe you've been listed as an emergency contact for Lily Collins, nurse, Santiago said, her voice calm but firm. We've been trying to reach her mother, but there's no answer. Are you her relative? Alexander stood still for a moment, his eyes narrowing. No, he replied sharply. I'm not related to her. I've only met her mother briefly. She applied for a job at my company. But this... He trailed off, glancing at the small, fragile figure in the crib through the window. This is all a mistake. I don't know why I'm listed as her contact. Nurse Santiago nodded but seemed unconvinced. This is highly unusual, she muttered, stepping aside. We need to find the mother. As Alexander stood there, something inside him shifted. He had come here out of duty to clear up what seemed like a bizarre mistake. But the moment he laid eyes on Lily, something stirred deep within him. The vulnerability of this tiny human, the fragility of life. He could no longer deny it. He had a responsibility here, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a strange pull to protect someone other than himself. In the quiet corners of the hospital, Officer Harris continued to observe. His instincts told him this situation wasn't as simple as it appeared. Alexander Reed's involvement wasn't just about a mistake or a random act of kindness. There was something deeper, something that tied Reed's fate to Helena's in ways no one could yet understand. The tension between what was happening and what might come next was thick in the air, and for the first time in years, Harris had a feeling he was about to witness something that would shake both these people's lives to their core. Alexander paced the sterile hospital corridor, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the cold linoleum floor. The hum of fluorescent lights above seemed to add to the tension hanging in the air. The pediatric ward was nothing like the sleek boardrooms of Pinnacle Corporation. The sounds here were different. Soft murmurs of worried parents, the occasional cry of a child, and the rustle of nurses' uniforms as they moved from room to room. It was almost too much, a stark contrast to the clinical, controlled world he usually inhabited. As he neared the small room where Lily lay, his mind raced with a dozen questions. Why had Helena listed him as the emergency contact? What could she possibly be thinking? He barely knew her. He had rejected her for a job she desperately needed, a job that could have been her way out of poverty. Yet here he was, standing in awe, a hospital, responsible for a child he had never met. What am I even doing here? Alexander wondered, his jaw tightening. He was used to solving problems with clear, logical solutions. But this was different. He had no answers, only questions that dug deeper into his conscience the longer he stood there. He stopped outside the door of the small room, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. Inside, a nurse was adjusting the IV drip connected to Lily. The infant lay in her crib, her small body pale against the white sheets connected to various machines that beeped softly. The child's tiny hand moved slightly, her fingers curling around the edge of the blanket, as if sensing his presence. She's so small, Alexander thought, an unfamiliar ache stirring in his chest. The sight of the baby hit him harder than he expected. There was something so pure about her, so innocent. And yet, here she was, sick, vulnerable, dependent on him, of all people, to make decisions about her care. The nurse looked up and gave him a soft smile, though there was a hint of suspicion in her eyes. She had been watching him ever since. He entered, no doubt wondering what brought a high-powered CEO to a children's hospital in the middle of Queens. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice calm but with a professional edge. "I'll just finish up here. You can sit with her for a while if you'd like. I'm sure it will help her." Alexander nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. As the nurse left the room, closing the door behind her, he sat down beside the crib. He looked at the baby girl, her eyes closed in peaceful sleep, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding her. "I don't even know what I'm doing," Alexander thought, feeling completely out of his depth. He had been the man who built Pinnacle from the ground up, the ruthless CEO who thrived on control and order. But nothing in his carefully curated world had prepared him for this, being here, in a hospital, responsible for a child he didn't know. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a phone vibrating in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another crisis from the office, but was instead greeted by a text from an unknown number. He opened it quickly. "I know who you are. Stay away from Helena and my daughter. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His hand tightened around the phone, his eyes narrowing as he read the message again. "Who is this?" he thought, his pulse quickening. There was no signature, no clue as to who could have sent it, but the message was clear. Someone knew about his involvement with Helena and Lily, and they weren't happy about it. Alexander's mind raced. Who would send something like this? His first thought was James Harrington, the man who had been trying to ruin him for years. But no, this message felt different. It wasn't about business. It was personal, and that made him more uneasy than he cared to admit. Just as the tension started to build, the door opened and Helena stepped into the room, her eyes wide with shock. She froze when she saw Alexander sitting next to Lily's crib, the baby's small figure so fragile against the sterile white sheets. "Mr. Reed?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Alexander stood up quickly, suddenly aware of how awkward the situation was. I'm just here to check on her," he said, his voice more stiff than he intended. "The hospital contacted me about being her emergency contact, and I felt like I needed to be here." Helena's gaze flickered between him and Lily, her face a mixture of confusion and frustration. "I didn't want this," she said quietly, her words coming out in a rush. "I never meant for you to get involved in this. I never wanted to drag you into my mess." Alexander took a step forward, trying to understand the turmoil in her voice. "Helena, I don't understand. Why did you list me? Why me, of all people?" She looked down at the floor, her hands wringing together as she struggled to form the words. "I had no choice," she whispered. "I have no one else. I don't have family here, and I didn't want to leave it blank. It felt like tempting fate. You seemed capable, like you could handle an emergency." The words hit Alexander harder than he expected. "Capable?" he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't the kind of man anyone should turn to in a crisis. He wasn't used to being a protector, to being relied upon. Yet here he was, standing in a hospital room, caught in a situation he hadn't planned for. Helena raised her head, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability that shook him. "I didn't think they'd actually call you. I thought I was doing the right thing, just filling in a blank. But now you're here and I don't know what to do." Alexander took a deep breath, stepping closer. "You don't have to do this alone, Helena," he said, his voice softer now, more sincere than he ever meant it to be. "I'm here. I'll help however I can." But just as the words left his mouth, the door burst open again, and Officer Harris stepped into the room, his eyes immediately scanning the scene. He had been watching from the hallway, his gut telling him that something wasn't right about the CEO's involvement. "Excuse me," Officer Harris said, his voice calm but firm. "There are questions that need to be answered. Ms. Morgan, I'm afraid I need to ask you a few things." The sudden appearance of the officer threw everything into chaos. Helena's face paled as she looked from Alexander to the officer, panic creeping into her expression. Alexander's chest tightened. "What now?" Harris stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "We need to figure out who's responsible for this situation, and we need to know why Mr. Reed is listed as the emergency contact for this child." The tension in the room skyrocketed as Helena's passed, and Alexander's involvement collided head-on. What have I gotten myself into? Alexander wondered, a new sense of dread settling deep in his stomach. This wasn't just about helping a mother in distress. This was about a tangled web of secrets, lies, and decisions made in desperation. Helena's world had just grown even more complicated, and so had Alexander's. The stakes were higher now, and neither of them knew where this path would lead. But one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The days following that fateful confrontation in the hospital were a whirlwind. Helena, Alexander, and Lily were thrust together into a world of uncertainty, a world where secrets were uncovered, and lives were irrevocably changed. Yet, amid all the turmoil, something unexpected began to take root between them. A bond, fragile but growing, forged in the fires of shared vulnerability and unspoken understanding. The battle with the Harringtons wasn't over, but Alexander's resolve had solidified. No longer was he the distant, calculating CEO that ruled Pinnacle Corporation with an iron fist. No longer was he the man who looked at others only as stepping stones for his own gain. Through the events of the past few days, Alexander had faced his own weaknesses, his own need for control, and had learned to let go of the tightly wound life he'd built. It wasn't easy. The court hearings with the Harringtons were grueling, and Alexander had to call in favors from people he had spent years cultivating relationships with, leveraging his own influence to ensure that Helena and Lily remained safe. But for the first time in a long while, the power and wealth he had accumulated felt hollow compared to the task at hand. The stakes were no longer about success in the corporate world. They were about something far deeper, about family, about protecting the vulnerable, and about standing up for what was right, even when the consequences could tear down everything he had worked for. Helena, too, had undergone a transformation. She had come into Alexander's life in a moment of desperation, willing to make choices that seemed illogical, just to ensure Lily had a chance at a better life. But as she stood at the crossroads of a future she hadn't planned for, she realized how much she had grown. Her courage to face the unknown, her willingness to trust Alexander with her deepest secrets, and her strength to fight for her daughter had all brought her here. In the weeks that followed, Alexander and Helena developed a deep respect for each other. There were moments of silence between them, moments when the weight of their pasts threatened to pull them back into old habits, but they also learned to communicate, to lean on each other in ways they never had before. One quiet evening, as they sat together in the corporate apartment that had become their home, Alexander found himself looking at Helena in a way he hadn't before. The woman who had once been a stranger, a timid job applicant, a woman barely scraping by, had become his ally, his equal. And in the soft glow of the lamplight, as Lily slept soundly in the next room, Alexander finally understood what he had been missing all along. It wasn't wealth or status or power that defined success. It was the connections we make, the people we choose to fight for, and the love that blossoms in the most unexpected places. "Helena," he said softly, his voice quiet but sincere. "I never thought I would say this, but I'm glad you listed me. I didn't know it at the time, but I think I needed to be part of this. Part of your life." Helena turned to him, her eyes soft but with a glint of humor. "I'm glad too," she replied. "I never thought someone like you would be the one to help us, but here we are." They shared a small, knowing smile, and, in that moment, the weight of everything that had happened settled into something simpler, something more profound. They had both come a long way, through misunderstandings, through fears, through hidden pain, and together they had found something that neither of them had expected: a family, not by blood, but by choice. As the weeks turned into months, Helena took on her new role at Pinnacle as Alexander's executive assistant. The transition was not easy. There were whispers behind closed doors, rumors about her rapid rise, about her mysterious past, about the bond between her and Alexander. But none of that mattered. The company's new family-friendly initiative, which had been created with the help of both of them, became a success. Alexander saw his company not just as a place for business, but as a place for people to grow, to have balance, to have support. Lily grew stronger each day, her once frail body now full of energy and laughter. She was a constant reminder of how much life had changed for all of them, how something as simple as a single act of kindness could alter the course of a person's future. And for Alexander, the biggest change wasn't in his company or his wealth. It was in himself. He no longer defined his success by the bottom line. He defined it by the people he chose to surround himself with, by the bonds he built, and by the love he had unexpectedly found. As for Helena, she had found her place, not only in Alexander's world but in her own life. She had once felt small, invisible, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. But now, she stood tall, her confidence rising as she embraced a future where she could offer Lily the stability and love she had always dreamed of. One evening, as Alexander and Helena walked through the city streets, Lily running ahead of them, Alexander took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. "I've spent my life chasing power," he thought, looking at Helena. "But real power is found in moments like this, in the people we choose to stand by." Helena glanced up at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Ready for the next step?" Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady, and nodded. "Ready." As they walked hand in hand with Lily's laughter echoing in the distance, it was clear that the journey ahead was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next, with strength, with love, and with the knowledge that the most important things in life couldn't be measured by money or success. They were measured by the people who stood by you when it mattered most. And in that moment, with everything they had been through, Alexander and Helena knew one thing for certain. They had built something real, and nothing, no one, could take that away from them.